To make things simple, let's continue with the mindset that abilities are more and less inherited through your genetics and they're going to be stable, whereas skills are going to be learned and developed. Now let's start by looking at abilities. And when we look at abilities, there's two general types of abilities that are important to organizational behavior, and those are intellectual abilities and physical abilities. When we look at intellectual abilities, these are the intelligence that is needed to perform job activities. And I felt as I read the chapter that there was a little bit of a confound or a confusing of intelligence with the test that measures it. There are a number of different intelligence tests out there within organizational behavior. The test of intelligence or general mental ability that we use most often is the Wonderlic Personnel Test. We use it because it's cheap and quick to administer, and we found that as job predictors go, the Wonderlic Personnel Test is pretty much the single best predictor of job performance out there. That people who do well on the Wonderlic Personnel Test tend to make better employees, all other things being equal. But as I've mentioned before, intelligence tests do have a pretty high degree of racial bias, and we know that Asians do tend to score the highest, followed by whites, Hispanics, finally blacks, but these differences have very little to nothing to do with later job performance. So the challenge is to find intelligence tests with lower racial differences. And there are some research that suggests that intelligence tests that don't use words but instead look for you to find patterns in images tend to be more race neutral than word based intelligence tests. So we have general mental ability. The second is physical abilities, which is do you have the physical stamina, the strength, the dexterity necessary to do your work? Now, these can be honed to a certain extent, but again, we're going to treat them as an ability or something that you were born with that you either have or don't have. Teachers and psychologists like the Wonderlic because within 10 minutes we get a quick and dirty single number estimate of general mental ability or intelligence. But we know from theory that although this single number is useful for hiring decisions, that general mental ability is more complicated than that. That in fact there are numerous specific abilities that go into forming general mental ability. And although researchers are currently debating how many specific abilities there are, 7 specific abilities are listed on the slide. And depending on the job you're hiring for, some are going to be important and some are going to be considerably less important. Let's first consider number aptitude, which is the ability to do speedy and accurate mathematical calculations. And such aptitude is going to be necessary for an accountant, but maybe less necessary for other jobs. Verbal comprehension is the specific ability to understand what you read or what you hear and be able to make sense of it. This verbal comprehension ability is going to be helpful in jobs where the manager needs to understand policies in order to carry out their job. Perceptual speed is the ability to identify visual similarities and differences quickly and accurately. This particular ability is going to be helpful when we have a job where it's necessary to take in a lot of information in a short amount of time and find patterns in the information. Perhaps a police detective would need perceptual speed. Inductive reasoning is present when an individual can identify a logical sequence in the data in order to find patterns of what's happening. An employee that needs to make decisions about the future based on historical information is going to need to make use of inductive reasoning abilities. Scientists are the key jobs we would be hiring for with inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is the opposite of inductive reasoning. It's using logic from the general area in all of the world to make implications about something very specific. Anyone who needs to make a critical decision in a hurry is going to need to have deductive reasoning to use the sum of all of their knowledge to figure out what's necessary to make the best decision possible. Spatial visualization is when someone can imagine how an object would look like if it were changed in location or space. Perhaps an interior designer would need spatial visualization. We also know that this is highly critical in people who are moving equipment around, such as a pilot would need to have spatial visualization skills in order to navigate with an airplane. Memory is the ability to retain and recall past experiences. Individuals who need to act quickly in a situation, such as a paramedic or a nurse, would need to have memory so that they can make decisions without having to look at other information. As an interesting aside, those of you who follow the NFL draft may be familiar with the Wonderlic as one way to predict how well NFL players, especially quarterbacks, are going to do in the league. And there's something to be said about the correlation between the Wonderlic score and how successful your draft-picked quarterback's going to be. When we look at Super Bowl winning quarterbacks such as Eli Manning and Tom Brady, they both have very high Wonderlic scores. I believe the top Wonderlic score in raw number of answers correct is 42. So you have Eli Manning and Tom Brady being towards the top of the curve, and journeyman quarterbacks such as Jeff George and Vince Young being towards the bottom of the Wonderlic's pool. Now, it's less than a 100% perfect correlation, especially when you see draft picks such as Ryan Leaf, who was the number 2 draft pick behind Peyton Manning and is generally considered to be the biggest draft bust of all time, having a fairly good Wonderlic score. So not perfect doesn't work for every pick, but there is a very strong correlation between Wonderlic and future performance, and that's why NFL scouts continue to use it. I've thus far talked about abilities primarily as a synonym for how smart you are, but abilities have more to do than just mental abilities. There's also a whole realm of physical abilities that you may need more or less of, depending on the job that you're hiring for. As you might expect, physical abilities are needed in those jobs where adequate job performance requires physical activity to complete a task. There are 3 main categories of physical abilities. There are the strengths, there are the flexibility, and then there is the generic other category. The strength factors include first, dynamic strength, which is the ability to quickly and repeatedly bend, stretch, or twist, or reach out with your arms, bodies, legs to apply repeated force, such as doing a large number of push-ups or being a cyclist. Then you have trunk strength, which is abdominal and lower back muscles that support the body, and you don't want them to give out or fatigue over time. You have static strength, which is the ability to exert maximum muscle force to lift, push, pull, or carry an object. You have explosive strength, which is the ability to use short bursts of muscle force to propel oneself, such as if you were a sprinter or a high jumper, or to throw an object. Some physical jobs will
require you to be flexible. Extant flexibility involves the ability to bend, stretch, twist, reach your body. These tend to be one-shot tests. Can you touch your toes? Can you do a back bridge? Whereas dynamic flexibility is the ability to repeatedly and quickly bend, stretch, reach out. And it can include how many windmills can you do within 30 seconds. Other physical factors include your body coordination. To be able to coordinate the movement of your arms, legs, torsos together when the body is in motion. You have balance, which is the ability to keep and regain your body balance or stay upright even when you're in an unstable environment. And finally, stamina, the ability to exert yourself over long periods of time without becoming winded.